A quest is a search for something. And every week, the Quest podcast will show you how we know what we know through interviews with people that have incredible stories of dedication and perseverance. I'm your host, Todd Fischer. Join me in this thought-provoking and inspiring podcast of discovery. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to No Earthly Explanation. I'm the producer, Todd Fischer, filling in for Brit Barbieri. And with me, as always, a man who never takes a day off, Don Schmidt. Hi, Don.
Hey,
welcome
Todd.
to the show.
Well,
Hi.
glad that you're always able to fill in. So maybe one of these times it'll be for me, but
Oh, no, right?
I can't think of a single time that I ever missed an engagement or anything of that sort. And so I'm very lucky in that, even with injury, that I've been able to hobble, to the affair.
For sure. I believe in for the first season, we had you here with a concussion and an injured eyeball. Like, I know you've been here through a lot of pain and suffering.
I don't remember the concussion. Isn't that surprising?
No, right? Oh, funny. Well, today we have a great guest with us. We're just going to hop right in. We have Paul Davids with us today. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Paul, I'm excited. Don has talked about you to me for years, and I've never been able to meet you. All the Roswell stuff I get involved in, everything you do, your art, your writing, I'm such a huge fan. So I'm actually really kind of happy that this happy accident of me filling in is happening today, because I get to actually meet you and chat with you. And as much as I would love to make this whole episode today about Transformers and Garbage Pail Kids and some things like that, I know Don is going to want to keep it a little more serious. We probably won't be able to get into that writing that you did in the old days. I'd love to talk cartoons and some Star Wars stuff and all that, but Don's going to steer me off those topics. But for those for those listeners that aren't familiar with you, Paul, if you could, in a nutshell, tell everyone about your achievements and kind of your history in this business.
Well, I'm a graduate of the American Film Institute Center for Advanced Film Studies. And from there, after a few years, I got started in the business. And as you mentioned, one of my early jobs was to work at Marvel Productions as the production coordinator for the Transformers show. It was all of the early animated episodes. And during, when we get to the early 1990s, I was under contract to Lucasfilm with my wife to write 6 of the Star Wars sequel books. But I think your listeners are probably most interested in the filmmaking career.
Right.
And the first big break on that, which Don Schmidt knows very well, because he was so involved in the project, was a movie for Showtime called Roswell, also released as Roswell, the UFO Cover-Up. Not to be confused with the television series that came out later that they called Roswell, but ours was a serious exploration in drama with some major stars, Kyle MacLachlan and Martin Sheen, Dwight Yoakam, of the Roswell UFO incident of 1947, as reported by witnesses, military people, those who confirmed that this was the crash of an unknown vehicle with unearthly origins. And I've certainly come to believe that, in spite of everything my government has had to say to the contrary.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, let's start with that. I want to, I remember this movie when it came out, and I want to say, and correct me if this isn't right, was this the first original film that a pay network made? Because I thought that there was some history to that Showtime was the first of those types of, cable premium channels that made an original movie. Do you recall that?
Well, HBO was making original movies, and
Okay.
Showtime was too. I think that this was the first cable original movie that dealt with the UFO subject in a very serious way.
Gotcha.
And it was their tentpole movie of the summer of 1994, which means that they put more resources into the budget, into the making of this film, really to carry their summer that year. And it came out, I mean, I'm proud of it to this day. It came out very well. I think it stands up after all these years. I mean, we're talking more than a quarter of a century now. So.
And I certainly agree with you, Paul, in that it's something. My late father, he would bring it up till even the week he died, that he was so proud, and not that his son, or not for what was accomplished, but that the truth was winning out, that we managed, and so much credit going to you, because you were ceaseless, you were relentless as far as in getting the movie made. And I will never forget that evening when you called me, and as a bit of history as well, that originally we were going with HBO.
Yes.
And the fact that we were to the point of even pre-production and casting. And
Yes.
it was the president of HBO at that time, Michael Fuchs, who, after a meeting in New York, places a phone call. We're not doing it.
Yes, we heard from Bob Cooper, who was in charge of their original movies. They had us in development at HBO for a year and a half.
Right.
And we had gotten to the point where we were authorized to begin casting. And they pulled the rug out from under us within a week of the casting efforts. They decided instead to make the Attack of the 50-Foot Woman remake with Daryl. They killed a serious piece of American history, and pulling the tarp back off a cover up that has that has really misled the American people for all of these years. Now I think we're at a point of being very nearly vindicated now, because we're, in those days, the government was not admitting to the existence of UFOs, or that they were still looking into it since the closing of Project Blue Book in the, early mid 1960s. We're not getting the whole truth now, but we're getting a whole lot more, because finally, officially, they've admitted that their craft flying in our skies with flight characteristics that they say they cannot duplicate and they cannot explain. They're not having much to say about where they think they're from, but the idea that these are not made on Earth, not made by human hands, this has come into the mainstream as something that you don't laugh at anymore. Back when we made the movie Roswell, we were still up against all of the debunking, the ridicule, and yet we had solid testimony on this from military people who had told us that indeed this had happened and the government had lied about it from top to bottom. Astronaut Gordon Cooper, I think, was one of those that came to our early defense on this. And it meant a lot to me to see the support we had from so many high-level people. And the film really had a huge following on cable TV. I mean, suddenly millions of people were hearing the truth about the Roswell incident that they had never been exposed to before in this way. I think there was a short piece on it on Unsolved Mysteries. And X-Files was just coming into its own at around that point, but we were the only dramatic feature, full-length feature to tackle this subject based on all the witness testimony. And I think the important thing is that it holds up. You can watch it today. It has just as much validity as it did in 1994.
Absolutely. And as you recall, that even Showtime was so much behind the film that not only the casting is well-known actors from top to bottom, which really was unheard of. at that time. And the fact that they filmed it in 35 millimeter with the thought that maybe there will be a theatrical release. And there was a short theatrical release in
other countries. I
Right.
think Australia had it, and I think in Europe they did some of the theatrical. And Don, I should mention, that really you were the germination of all of this. You and Kevin Randall came to me after I had a daylight flying saucer sighting in 1987. And it was an extraordinary, life-changing event for me with my two children to see in broad daylight a domed disc, a classic flying saucer shape, making maneuvers near our house, capturing our full attention as we stood out on the roof for around 5 minutes, and then vanishing. It changed my life. I mean, I think I read a massive number of UFO books in the months that followed that, and I was searching for help and information and understanding because I was not what they call a believer, before having the firsthand experience. I was not knowledgeable. I hadn't read the literature. I really didn't know. But within a few minutes' time, to have your sense of reality turned around so completely, through Roy Thinnis, actually.
Well, it was through the late Robert Wise.
Well, Robert Wise, yes, I went to him to seek his advice about the incident. He did.
That's right. That the irony that he directed probably, to me, the greatest UFO movie ever made, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
And I was able to have a meeting with him to talk about my experience. And he confided in me that he was convinced that these craft were real and from outer space, and that when he was making The Day the Earth Stood Still, that high-level people from Washington had been on set and had told him confidentially, Mr. Wise, you don't know how close to reality your film actually is.
Right.
He referred me to Roy Thinnis, the actor who had been the star of a television series called The Invaders, who was personally interested in investigating UFO sightings. And Roy Thinnis referred me to you, at that time, director of special investigations for the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. That was your job.
Right.
And you came out to Los Angeles, interviewed me. You did a drawing of where our sighting took place. You did a report on it. And you told me at that time that you and Kevin Randall were researching once again the Roswell incident. And you had written a 17-page outline for a book about it.
Right.
And I said, well, how about this? I have a lot of contacts now in Los Angeles. What if I option your 17-page outline? We make a deal.
Right.
I'll hold the rights on it up through when this is published, and I'll try to get us a movie deal. So that actually happened, I think, in 1989. And you took me down to Roswell many times. I met a lot of these key witnesses. It was completely persuasive. And then it took us basically 4 years to get a green light. We were in development at HBO thanks to director Jeremy Kagan. He had made some films for HBO. So when he pitched the Roswell project to them, they put it into development. So we all had a deal. But what that deal meant was we were stuck in development for a year and a half while writer Arthur Koppett, the late Arthur Koppett, by the way.
Oh, I was not aware.
Yeah, he passed away a couple of years ago, Don. But they had him under contract, and they had him writing 8 drafts of the screenplay over a year and a half before they said, we'll put it into pre-production, and then they killed it a week later. So we had to start all over again in terms of selling it, and with help from producer Eileen Kahn, who had strong contacts at Showtime, Showtime bought the project. And to our amazement, within 6 months, we had a very large television budget for that time. And we were off to New Mexico with dozens of 1947 cars.
But the
Actually,
irony,
we had to film it in Arizona, as I
yes,
recall.
the irony is we did not film in New Mexico. We
That's
filmed
right.
in Bisbee, Arizona, in the southeast corner. But
The problem
close.
was that Roswell at that time had so many McDonald's and Denny's, and it didn't look 1947 anymore.
No. Where Bisbee, Arizona did.
Yes.
Very cool. The architecture was wonderful.
So bottom line, this film was a great, great experience. I think it was a breakthrough for a lot of millions of people who saw it. And now there's a new breakthrough coming down. Let's just jump right into the fact that on April 18th, a fabulous, fabulous new documentary will be streaming online. You can pre-order it at Amazon now. It's called Accidental Truth, UFO Revelations, a film by Ron James.
Right.
But my wife and I are executive producers in it. You are in it, Don.
Yes.
And I'm going to give our listeners the bottom line. This film, and I'll repeat the name, Accidental Truth, UFO Revelations, it tears apart the cover-up like no other project has ever done in our lifetime, and opens the door for understanding of the facts about recovered unidentified craft and the secret specialized access, unacknowledged access projects, I think is what they call it, that have been studying materials from these craft without any acknowledgement to the American people or anyone in the world that the government has in fact known for decades that we are not alone in the universe. And they have withheld this truth for us while insisting on masquerading under an absurd and outrageous charade that they are searching for extraterrestrial life and think maybe they'll find it someday, but haven't found it yet. And it's a damnable lie.
Yes.
It's a lie that they've forced all of us to live under. And that lie hopefully is coming to an end. There have been the beginning of some congressional investigations. Not very impressed with those, by the way, so far, but the door has been opened to letting whistleblowers come forward without fear of repercussion.
And that is what we have pushed from the very beginning, that without immunity for potential whistleblowers, this will be nothing more than a repeat of the Condon Committee report and even the congressional hearings that they attempted in 1966, that what Congress needs to be the most livid about is that they too have been deceived. They too have been lied to.
Let's talk about Congressman Tim Burchett.
Yes.
He's a Republican of, is it Tennessee?
Tennessee.
And he has absolutely come forward and declared that there has been this total cover-up, deceiving the American public, that it's been a nest of lies going on forever, and he's had enough of it. He said, frankly, it's got to end. We're up to here with it. And they are trying to make some progress. Now, as our film points out, they'll admit now to the existence of these craft in our skies that they can't explain, but they will not admit that anything has been recovered or that they know what these are. And that has been described as a kind of red line. They won't pass over that line. They won't go to the confession of the craft recoveries because they are studying these materials under circumstances where they don't want anybody to have access to these black projects or even that they exist. So that's where we stand.
That and the fact that even 2 years ago, when they had the first Pentagon report to Congress, they only acknowledged the phenomenon back to 2004.
Yes.
Imagine. I mean, and the point being that if you go all the way back to 1947, the skies are rather pristine. They're rather virgin. There's no satellites. There are no drones. The best they could come up with is weather balloons, as they did back in 47.
Yeah, we're
So
still dealing with balloons, right? We were
the irony.
We were into all these news reports about the legitimacy of these craft that have been described by Navy pilots in unambiguous terms. And then all of a sudden we're veered off to 4 weeks of news reports on a Chinese balloon.
But that serves again as a wonderful argument for Roswell, that their fallback position continues to be balloons, weather balloons, devices that anyone would recognize for what they are, and yet it takes Stinger, Sidewinder missiles to bring them down. I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, and they fired at 4 devices, I think, and then they were searching on the ground for 3 of them and never found. They say they never found the debris.
Right,
Come on,
right.
What do you think?
The territory, like in northern Alaska, is inaccessible, as well as even over Lake Huron, where it took 2, Sidewinder missiles to bring down what apparently is a hobby balloon that was launched in Illinois.
Well, that's what they said. For me, that's like the Doug and Dave story of the crop circles. The mystery of the crop circles we had, and then these 2 fellows named Doug and Dave said, well, over a couple of beers, they went out at night with some planks of wood and they created all the crop circles. And of course,
night after night without detection, right?
Yeah, the media loved that explanation, and that was the end of your crop circles, which of course have been continuing ever since with the most complex designs that the Doug and Dave couldn't fathom. But anyway, they're experts at misdirection.
Right.
They've always got the Wizard of Oz thing. Don't look at the man behind the cloth.
Attention to the man behind
the curtain. Yeah.
So
that's
you need to point out though that again, much to your credit, the fact that the Roswell movie was nominated Best Made for TV Movie, Golden Globe Award.
Yes.
And even to be nominated is quite the accomplishment.
And, that was a nomination from the Hollywood Foreign Press, because they are the sponsors of the Golden Globe Awards. So we're talking foreign press. We're not talking about American journalists or an American organization that honored it. It was a film about a U.S. cover-up. And in Europe, of course, they loved it. So there you go.
And you were invited at one time for the possible private screening at the White House of the movie, correct?
Well, I don't know. I think that's a myth, Don. I don't remember that one. There was a private screening of E.T. once at the White House for Ronald Reagan before our time.
Right.
And Ronald Reagan took Steven Spielberg aside and told him, "My son, you don't know just how close to reality you are." Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but our movie. As a matter of fact, let me tell you that we were invited by somebody who was involved with Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Yes.
That we wanted to show it there, and they have a marathon race, I guess, every year, and it was proposed that we bring our alien from the movie, which I have in this case.
The animatronic alien, the survivor.
That we bring it there to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which is, the marathon is off base, so that, the military people and their families could get their picture taken with, but the whole thing was...
Point out that Wright-Pat is where the wreckage and bodies from Roswell originally went. That everything from Roswell was shipped to Wright Field, which became Wright-Patterson in Dayton,
which
Ohio.
we know for a fact from many witnesses, whistleblowers who have spoken out, but of course the Air Force has denied it forever. Well, in our effort to bring the alien to the marathon and show the movie there at Wright-Pat, that was shot down.
Right.
I guess it went up through their public affairs people, the people with the relations with the media. And the official reason was they would not show the movie because it contradicts an official Air Force report.
Correct.
And what official Air Force report is that? That Roswell was
Project
mobile
Mobile
balloon project and nothing more.
Spy balloon, right.
Yeah.
And you would recall that because you thought about making a cross-country drive from
Yeah.
LA at that with
Yeah.
the
With the alien sitting upright in the passenger seat of my car.
you would have agreed to it, provided you could also show the movie. And that's
Yes.
what, nixed the whole deal. So they were not about to, show propaganda as they would have defined it.
Yeah. So
you also, you have a fascination with Marilyn Monroe.
yes, I made a film called Marilyn Monroe Declassified.
Right.
And actually, it's just into negotiations right now on an extension of the license for the television showings. It's been available for a long time. Well, one of the interesting things about the Marilyn Monroe case is the evidence that through what they call pillow talk, I guess, John F. Kennedy had revealed to Marilyn Monroe about the Roswell incident and the fact that aliens are real and that we have recovered saucers. And Marilyn Monroe was wiretapped by the FBI, the CIA, and the Teamsters. Why was she wiretapped? Well, she married Arthur Miller,
Right.
playwright, author of Death of a Salesman, and he was an avowed communist. So she attracted the attention of a lot of the wrong people at that point in time. And so the authorities, the CIA, became aware of what Marilyn knew, and they were afraid of what she might expose. I would say, if you can, see the movie Marilyn Monroe Declassified,
Which I have, yes.
to understand the circumstances of her death, because we prove, I think, quite conclusively that she was murdered. It was not
murdered. Right.
This is another one of our cover-ups. Our country is famous for democracy and cover-ups.
Was it true, Paul, that just prior to her murder, that she had placed a phone call to a
Dorothy
writer
Kilgallen
in Mexico?
Oh, yes.
That she had information that would shock the world. And I hardly think that an affair with the president or the attorney general would shock the world.
What you're referring to is a phone call she had with Jose Bolaños, who was Mexican, and he had been her escort at a couple of Hollywood events. So I don't know, they described him as one of her many boyfriends. But apparently he's the one who had the last phone call with Marilyn Monroe. And in that phone call, she told him that she was going to go public with some things that she knew that would absolutely shock the entire world. And then suddenly the phone went dead. And somebody on her side hung it up.
Right.
The phone. And these were the thugs of mafia boss Sam Giancana,
who was also
pushed into her house. Yeah, there had been a commotion at the door, and she had left the phone in the middle of the conversation to see what the ruckus was at the door, and she never came back to the phone. And then someone had hung it up. It was one of the interesting hundreds of details connected with the case of Marilyn Monroe. You know, Don, while we have time, I'd like to talk about some of the other fascinating films that I've made and adventures that have led me to.
Of course.
One of the very popular ones is called Jesus in India.
Yes.
Now you can find most of my films online. You can find them at Amazon Prime or the Tubi channel or Amazon Freevee and other channels too, other platforms. I think most of the films I've made are online. Now, certainly Jesus in India is. I went to India to make the film, over 6 weeks traveling 4,000 miles through India. It is based on a book, based on the question of where was Jesus during the years from age 12 to 30, the 18 so-called missing years. There's only one sentence about those years in the Bible, in Luke. It says, and Jesus grew in stature and in wisdom and in favor with God and man. That covers 18 years.
Right.
18 years of the life of Jesus. So what happened during those 18 years? Well, in India, there's been a long-standing belief that at about age 12, going on 13, that he took the Silk Road to India. It was a major trade route at that time. In India, they claimed that the three wise men were rishis from India. Gifts of gold, incense, and myrrh were traditional gifts in India to holy personages.
Correct.
And so this is a 2,000-year-old cold case. But where they say where there's smoke, there may be fire. And I went with writer Ed Martin, who wrote the book King of Travelers, Jesus' Lost Years in India. He also wrote Jesus in India, King of Wisdom, about the making of our film there in India. And we traced down every lead we could to learn more about it. And in the course of it, we got to interview the Shankaracharya of the Hindus, leader of billions of Hindus, at the Jagannath Temple in Puri. It was translated, we have captions in the film because he spoke in Hindi. And he claimed that Jesus was there at the Jagannath Temple, which is 2,500 years old. And we spoke to Buddhists. I spoke to a representative from the Vatican, Monsignor Corrado Balducci, who was their head exorcist under Pope John Paul II.
Right.
Fascinating quest, which also took us to Kashmir. I'll just say, if you'd like to know more about it, find Jesus in India and see it, and you'll know everything about it that we learned. So that was another one.
But just as a question, you came away feeling that you at least had talked to enough historians involved even in other religious faiths that accepted the very notion that Jesus at least spent some time in India during those missing 18 years.
I think so. And we know that Thomas, after the crucifixion, did go to India. That's accepted by the Catholic Church. I think John Paul II went to, there was a great basilica for Thomas, and his original church can be seen there. It's in Chennai, I think. It used to be called
Which to me is significant, because that would suggest as though there was a predecessor.
Connection.
Someone, yeah, right, a connection. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's a very, very, very interesting connection. And we went to investigate the Thomas story when we were in India also. And I think one of the interesting supports for the whole thesis of the movie, I'm a graduate of Princeton University, right, and I interviewed a great biblical scholar at Princeton University, who in the discussion of this, she said, we cannot rule out this idea that Jesus was in India. We can't rule it out. And that in itself was a huge victory, because this idea also had gotten debunked, for many, many quarters, that kind of dismissed the work of Edward T. Martin, our author, and put him off in a little corner. But now here's a major professor at Princeton University who's saying we can't dismiss what he's saying. She's not saying we can prove it, but if you can't dismiss it, then at least it's on the playing field for serious people to look at the evidence. And that's where.
When you consider that, imagine the United States military, the Pentagon, the Air Force, actually stating, we can't dismiss that something extraordinary crashed outside of Roswell in 1947. So for you to have received essentially a blessing to pursue the matter, to look into this, that it would be something that the church would be very interested in.
Yes. Well, officially, the church doesn't accept that he was in India, but that doesn't.
No.
Look. I don't think you can prove it one way or the other. I don't think so. But like they say, where there's smoke, there's fire, and you see our movie, and you'll see all the smoke. There's a lot of it.
Very good.
It's fascinating. Fascinating because, many of the ideas of early Christianity coincide with a lot of the principles of Hinduism and Buddhism, the Far Eastern influence. You see, the break with Judaism was in Judaism, there was a vengeful God that said an eye for an eye.
Right. Mm-hmm.
An eye for, if your enemy takes your eye, take his eye. Correct. And that's then along comes the teachings of Jesus saying you turn the other cheek. Offer him your coat if he steals from you. Again, a lot of the gentler precepts of Christianity also have a root in Hinduism and Buddhism. It's no longer an eye for an eye. And that's the break from sort of the Old Testament to the New Covenant, if you will. It's interesting. Here we are having this interview. It's the day before Easter. It's Passover. I'll remind everyone that Jesus's Last Supper was a Passover Seder.
Absolutely.
Jesus was Jewish.
He Jewish.
In synagogues. He was rejected in synagogues, and I think he ran into trouble when he contradicted the rabbis of his era. And politically, this was unacceptable. And then he was on their public enemy #1 list. And this was a break. This was really, and the early Christianity birth was really an argument between Jews, between sects of Judaism. His disciples were Jews.
We're all Jews, right?
The early history is very, very, very fascinating because, of course, these things from 2,000 years ago so massively influence our culture today. Don, I don't know if we have a lot of time left, but we must get into the life after death.
But Todd, you have a question, right?
Yeah, it's where I do want to talk about. The Life After Death project, but I want to ask you just real quick. When did your interest in the unexplained or conspiracies or the like, when did that start to happen for you? Were you a young boy when you started to question things? When did that all begin for you?
No, not as a young boy. When I was in Princeton, I came across the autobiography of Yogananda, and that opened my mind on the possibility that materialism wasn't really the answer. But as far as the interest in the unusual, the unexplained, and thinking that these very, very controversial subjects might have validity to them that should be further researched and brought to the public. In 1983, I was a segment producer on a syndicated show called Lie Detector, which was, the host was F. Lee Bailey, the attorney.
Right.
Actually, he was one of those that defended OJ.
The dream team, right.
Yeah, and we had a top polygrapher on the show. And the essence of Lie Detector was we would invite people onto television that had an unusual story where they claimed they were telling the truth, and they would submit to a lie detector on air. And then Ed Gelb, who was head of the American Polygraph Association, would interpret their polygraph that he had administered, and F. Lee Bailey would discuss the results. We had some very interesting people with so-called paranormal claims come on that show. And this began to open my eye. I mean, we had Betty Hill on the show.
Right.
You know, the story of Betty and Barney Hill, the first declared abductees in America. And she passed the polygraph we gave her. It had to do with showing her the star map.
Right.
That had been studied, I think, by Marjorie Fisher. Margaret Fisher. It was a duplicate of what Betty Hill claimed she saw inside the spaceship when she was abducted, of the star trade routes of these aliens. And we didn't ask her, you know, were you abducted? Do you think you were did you really see aliens? They had a better way to approach it, which was to show her the star map and ask, do you believe that this is close to an accurate representation of what you saw during your experience? And she said, yes, she did, and she passed the polygraph. So you're not only validating that she thinks that the star map is real, but you're validating the fact that she believes that she really was abducted and was in the presence of aliens. The case that I worked on directly, which had to do with life after death and mediums, was the case of Dorothy Allison, who was a psychic detective from New Jersey, who came to us with all sorts of affidavits from the police department of Nutley, New Jersey, where she was from. And the police are saying, we have sought her help in finding the bodies of murder victims who have disappeared in many cases. And she has accurately led us to find many of these murder victims. Well, this was compelling to hear it from the police department, and she had many affidavits. And I had her come out on the show, and we dealt with a case that happened in Long Island of I think it was a 14-year-old girl who went missing. They never found her body. And Dorothy wanted to touch some articles of her clothing to be in touch with her essence, with her vibrations, if you will. And she offered clues of things she saw. She had images come to her, visions. She would visually see these things connected with the place of the crime. And based on all these clues she provided, the body of this young woman was found at a place that matched everything from Dorothy Allison's description. So at that point, 1983, you have Paul David saying, wait a minute, this is real. This is real.
Wow.
In order to have this information come through and be validated like this, this means that there had to be some spirit unseen who was providing this information to this psychic detective. Now you have to introduce the fact that there are other realms, that there is at some level a survival of death, that those departed can communicate with those who are living. This was 1983. Now, for me, this topic didn't come back to the forefront of something that I would actually want to make a film about until 2009. That's a long gap. We're talking about decades. I had dropped it. And then something happened in my life extraordinary that led me to make 3 films about the topic, and they are all called the Life After Death Project. I want to say you can find the first 2 of them on Amazon. You can find all 3 of them on Tubi. Now, Tubi has ads. I think if number 1 on Amazon doesn't have ads, and but you can find these films is the point. And the first one is the Life After Death Project 1. Then I made the Life After Death Project 2, Personal Encounters. This has proven online to be the most popular of all the films I've made. It has a larger response in streaming. I almost can't understand it, because number 2 was made as an afterthought of number 1, but it's proven the most popular. Then last December, I released a film now on Tubi called The Life After Death Project 3, Seance Encounters. And I encourage listeners to seek out all of these. It's a college education in this whole subject matter, and it's coming from someone who had all of these things personally affect my life. And the reason I say this is as follows. I had a mentor in the film business named Forrest J. Ackerman, very prominent in the field of science fiction. He was the editor of a magazine I loved from childhood called Famous Monsters of Film.
Yeah.
He had a great collection of all the props from the science fiction movies in his home in Hollywood that we called the Acker Mansion. I met him when I was 13 or 14 at a science fiction convention in Washington, D.C. I was a young filmmaker with a home movie camera making 8mm monster movies with dinosaurs and mummies and skeletons and dragons. And I showed some of my childhood films to Fari Ackerman, and he began publishing these shots from my childhood films in this national magazine. He made me famous as a young teenager. And when I went to the American Film Institute, I really got to know and befriended Fari. I visited the Acker Mansion many times. He had me write for him for his new magazine called Monsterland. We were buddies, and I felt close to him. I loved this man. He died in December of 2008. He was 92 years old. 2 years before he died, I came out with a film very much about him called The Sci-Fi Boys. This is another one you can find online. It's won a lot of awards. It has most of the top people in science fiction in it. Peter Jackson of King Kong and The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit is the host. And Lucas and Spielberg are in it. Dennis Muren, 8, 9, 10 Academy Awards for Industrial Light and Magic special effects. Rick Baker, Monster Maker, 9 or 10 Academy Awards for special makeups. Fari discovered all these people when they were young. They all read his magazine. Now, Fari he was an atheist, didn't believe in life after death. And he said he thought it was just like pulling the plug on a computer when you're gone, you know, nothing there anymore. But he said half jokingly, you know, but if it turns out I'm wrong and I wake up to the big science fiction convention in the sky, he says, oh, I'll have a big party with all my late friends, you know, from Boris Karloff to Bela Lugosi and George Pal. And but he said when the party dies down, he says, maybe I would drop you a line, right? And he said this to a couple of other people he was close to too. Now, why did I make the Life After Death Project movies? Because after Fari died, we held a huge tribute for him at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. And that week, weird stuff started happening to me and others who were close to him. I mean, suddenly it was like we were living in the Twilight Zone, and Fari Ackerman, deceased, was in touch with us. And there were so many strange messages that you couldn't explain. There was enough for me not only to make a film about it, but I wrote a book with Gary Schwartz called An Atheist in Heaven, The Ultimate Evidence for Life After Death.
Right.
And I've documented over the years over 100 incidents, which seem to me like it's Fari Ackerman still being in contact with me. But it all started with one incident for me. The week after his tribute, where I had a document, I had printed out on my printer. I went out to a casino. I was in New Mexico, Santa Fe, for an hour. I come back, 2 hours. I come back. The document is dry and it's looks normal. I look through it. It's a 20-page list of phone calls and business meetings I'd had the previous year for tax purposes. I plopped it down on a bed. I'm alone in this house, which has security alarm. I'm alone in the house. I'm out of the room for 5 minutes. And when I come back, the document has been physically changed in a tangible, targeted way. 4 words on the first page of this document have been blacked out with whether it's ink or whatever it is, I don't know. It's dark. It's still moist, meaning it just happened. And it's just these 4 words exactly targeted. I was scared to death. I mean, I felt like I was in the presence of a ghost, and I didn't know whether this was some kind of demon. I mean, you know, it was scary to me. But over the next few days, I figured out, wait a minute, this is Fari Ackerman dropping me a line. He said he dropped me a line. He's an editor. He dropped the line of text. He really dropped it. He excised it.
Right.
And the words on that document led me to the fellow he was closest to in the last 10 years, Joe Moy of Hawaii, was his caretaker and his man Friday. And Joe confided in me that after the tribute, he had this incredible, he didn't know whether it was a hallucination or a visitation or whatever it was, but he said it was like Fari came to me. I saw him. He talked to me. Well, this is Joe Mo. What are the words that crossed out? Essentially, the words that spoke to Joe Mo. Spoke to Joe. He's telling me after he's deceased that he spoke to Joe Mo and he thanked him for the tribute. Is this Fari's way of thanking me for speaking at the tribute? Hey, Paul, don't have a lot of time here. Just tell you, check with Joe Mo. I spoke to him. I gave my thanks to him. He'll tell you.
Wow.
This was just insane. Now, it wasn't literally spoke to Joe Mo that was crossed out. It was spoke to Joe Amodi, but the name Mo is in the middle of it. And Fari, who loved puns, he loved names within names and wordplay. He was always about, can you find a name within this name? And there he did it for me. And I took the document to the head of chemistry at a major university. They began to study it. I know we don't have much more time here, but I'm going to sort of lead you to a wrap up. The point was, scientists began studying this document. They studied it for 3 years. They are now believers in the afterlife. This cannot be explained. I took my camera to their labs. I filmed. That began the documentary, The Life After Death Project, which expanded and expanded and got into the research of so many people. I have major people who've researched this field and written about it in Life After Death Project 1. And then came number 2, about people's personal experiences hearing from loved ones after they died. And number 3, the seance was, we held a seance at Fari's Acker Mansion after he passed. We were there studying the house for 4 days. Weird activity had been reported there. We held a seance. And the strangest stuff happened in the seance, particularly the one scientist who was there, who was a skeptic, and he's not a skeptic anymore.
That's a good way to wrap us up, I think.
Yeah.
But the main thing is, Fari is no longer a skeptic.
Yeah, right.
As Gary Schwartz likes to say, Fari changed his mind after he passed.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the
funny.
great point of the entire situation, the fact that this wasn't someone who was anticipating, this form of afterlife.
No.
But it was somebody who totally discounted it. It was like,
Yes.
show
And
me, prove it to me.
Being a futurist as he was, because his whole life was about science fiction and how it predicts our future, he would have been the personality to want to let us know that he had been wrong. He was a future. He would have been the one to sound the word, and he did. You don't have to believe me. Everything I'm telling you is true, really happened to me, but you can maintain your skepticism, but please see the 3 movies and see if you still dismiss this, because it's true.
Paul, how can people find you out there on the interwebs?
I'm an artist. I painted hundreds of pictures, and my website is
Beautiful, beautiful work.
Paul Davids, DAVIDS, and hyphen artist.com. And that's it's a website that has hundreds of my paintings. It also has information about my books and films, and it has a contact sheet, so you can contact me there, and I do respond to all of the correspondence that I get.
So the next time we have you on, Paul, we'll talk about your paintings. We'll talk about even your wife Hollis and her long history with the entertainment field, both at Columbia and at Universal, and then your father, Jules Davids.
I'd love to talk about that, and my film, The Artist and the Shaman, partially my father, will soon be re-released online. Excellent. Also want to mention another title to look for. It's not out there yet, but I think within a month to 6 weeks, you'll be able to find Professor Hack Hard Drive Hacks the Universe. This is a parody. It's a satire. It's a character I made up that I play, like Sacha Baron Cohen plays Borat. I become Professor Hack Hard Drive, and I'm an expert on everything about contemporary culture. It's irritating everyone.
I always ask, so this is what you call retirement, right?
This is retirement, and retirement consists of producing more movies than I ever did when my films were being rejected one after the other.
No. We're so happy that you continue, because when a person is blessed to have all the talent and all the creativity and all the original thinking that you possess, how can you stop? I mean, you can take a break from it, but it's only to recharge, and then you come back with even more of a zeal and just a passion for what you do. And you clearly have always had that for as long. We've known each other now for going on over 35 years. My God.
Yes. Yeah. And you know what? I don't feel 35 years older, Don. Maybe 5 years older.
No,
I don't feel that much older.
I know.
And you don't look older. I mean, we still have retained, our youthful enthusiasm for everything that
As Dr. Hynek my scientific director, used to always say, don't ever lose that little boy wonderment. And I can vouch for, I think, the three of us, the fact that every day we look for the next adventure. So
that's it.
That's it. All right, Paul, thanks for coming out to be on No Earthly Explanation. Everyone go check out his website and look for those films and those documentaries. It was really a pleasure to have you on. And for those who want to find us on the interwebs, you can find us at No Earthly Explanation on Instagram and Facebook. You can find Don on Instagram at Don47Tom, and he's on Facebook at Donald Raymond Schmidt. And if you have questions or comments, you can email us at noearthlyexplanation@gmail.com. So until next time, Don.
Todd,
maybe I'll host again. We'll see.
We'll see, but it's always a pleasure having you step in when necessary. But and once again, I can't thank Paul enough for being with us, and we will certainly have him back.
Absolutely. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hi, everyone. I'm Todd Fischer, the host of the Cult Following podcast. Cult Following is a podcast that studies the personalities and common traits of cult leaders and their followers. Get the real story behind these infamous and oftentimes tragic cults from a new perspective through exhaustive research and from interviews with people that were there. Available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fischer and Anthony Smith and is distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure and visit the official website for Metacortex Publishing at metacortexpublishing.com or find us on social media for other unique content.